The second part of the 9 clause requires organization to conduct the internal audits at planned intervals. The purpose of the internal audit is to provide information if the QMS is fulfilling the requirements of the company for the quality management system and the requirements of the ISO 9001 and to improve the QMS. This is important because without internal audit you wouldn't have a systematic and objective overview of what is really happening in your quality management system. In order to conduct the effective internal audit, the standard requires organizations to establish the internal audit program, which is basically an annual schedule of the internal audits. The next step is to determine the scope of the audit, meaning which processes and departments will be audited during the individual audit. For example, in a case of a bigger company, some of the processes will be audited in June, while the rest of the processes will be audited in September. In case of a smaller company, it is more likely that you have the whole company within the internal audit scope. You should also document the scope of the audit through your audit program. Before the audit starts, it is important to determine the audit criteria against which the audit will be performed. And this can be the ISO 9001 standard itself, the legal requirements, contractual obligations, or requirements of some other interested party. Then the company must select the auditors to conduct the audit. The most important thing here is to avoid conflict of interest, meaning that the auditor cannot audit his own work. This is especially challenging in the small companies with limited human resources. The auditor must also be familiar with the ISO 9001 standard and when auditing with auditing techniques, which is usually achieved by sending the auditor for the internal auditor course. Now the plan for individual internal audit can be created, and although it is not a mandatory document, it can be very useful because with a documented plan you will avoid missing something out, and it is easier to communicate the information about the audit to relevant people. When defining the audit plan, you need to determine the amount of time you will spend in each process or department, what people and roles you want to interview during the audit, and also who will conduct the audit. The audit can be conducted by a single auditor or by the audit team. The results of the audit must be presented to the top management in a form of documented internal audit report. This report usually includes the general observations of the auditor, spotted nonconformities, and good practices identified, and recommendations.